concern among economists and financial analysts. Now, while some of them see this as a potential lifeline for struggling businesses and borrowers, others, including our guest today, has described the move as too aggressive and probably possibly premature. Now, to help us unpack the implications of this decision from inflation and credit access to business confidence and long-term recovery, I'm joined by a seasoned voice in Ghana's economic space, Professor Patrick Assuming, and he's an economist at the University of Ghana Business School and a respected commentator on public finance and monetary policy. And he's going to help us have this conversation this morning. Prof, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well by God's grace. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well too. Thanks so much for making time to speak to me this morning.
It's a pleasure, and good morning to listeners.
Yeah. Right, Prof. So let's get into it. Now, the Bank of Ghana, of course, cut its policy rates by 300 basis points from 28% to 25%, a move you have described as too aggressive. What was your initial reaction, Prof?
Well, I mean, going into that meeting, there's been a lot of pressure on the central bank to cut the policy rate in line with the fact that we've seen a consistent disinflation. So the risk to inflation appears to be subsiding. And then the fact that the economy appears to be recovering faster than anticipated. So generally, when they go into these meetings, it's a balance on the risk to growth and risk to inflation. So obviously, if the risk of inflation is going down, then it gives them more scope to cut the policy rate. So going into the meeting, there have been a lot of expectation. I was of the view that, yes, that there will be reasonable basis for cutting it, but it will be good to hold the rate, because even though inflation has been falling, we're still not at a medium-term target, which is 6 to 10%. So my expectation was that even if there was going to be a cut, it would be rather small. So it was quite surprising for me to see such a substantial cut in the policy rate.
So what would have been a realistic cut for you?
Well, I think it's just a matter of being cautious and knowing that even though the economy is really responding strongly, there are still a lot of risk. So for me, I think, like I said, probably holding the rate and change, or if there's going to be cut, something like 100 basis points. That's what I thought would have been reasonable. But you have to say, it's not all the data that the committee members see that is available to the public. They give us a summary, but we don't get to see everything. So perhaps, but that's based on the information I see. That's what I would have expected.
I see. So do you think it's something quite political?
I don't know if it's political in the sense that a lot of organizations have put pressure on the governor, because I've been in discussions involving the Mr. Mark Beduabuaje, the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. You had heard Guta and then the EGI, all of them. I mean, the business associations and the business world were absolutely adamant that the rate should come down.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you see that kind of pressure. That's the sense in which you can say it was political, because I mean, there's a lot of pressure had been brought to bear on the committee. Look, I think some were even expecting 500 basis points reduction. Some were expecting even more. So I think if you take it from that point, of course, there's always some power play. People trying to put pressure on the MPC to take specific course of action.
So you are of the view, if I get you well, that maybe not necessarily supported by the data that we have, but because of the course, the Bank of Ghana had to do this 300 basis points reduction. Is that what you mean?
So I'm not saying that it's not supported by the data. What I'm saying is that, sometimes there's some information, some things happening in the you get to see with a time lag.
Mm.
And it's dramatic change in the course of action can be interpreted differently by the market. The first time this management of the BOG took over, the first meeting in March, they raised the rate. And then the second meeting, they held the rate.
Yeah.
So I think when you swing dramatically from seeing that, oh, we need to raise the rate, and you raise it, and then 2 meetings later, you have to cut the rate by such a substantial portion, I think, you begin to, people begin to want, most central banks don't work that way. I mean, because when you take some action, for instance, if you raise the rate, it takes up to a year before the full effect will be felt within the economy.
Mm.
So perhaps, or I don't know whether the initial decision to raise the rate was seen as maybe it wasn't the appropriate decision for which you need to dramatically cut the policy rate only 2 meetings later.
Mm.
The other thing that we have to understand is that the IMF have been absolutely adamant that the monetary policy rate should be kept tight.
Mm.
Now, if you look at 25% against the historical rate, it is still tight. No two ways about that.
Yeah.
But, you know, they have spoken, even in the week leading to the meeting, after the budget had been read, they still reiterated the need for monetary policy rate to be kept tight. So I think when you balance all of that, I think if you look purely at the data and you are not too forward looking, you can see why you say, well, inflation is trending and it's time to cut the rate. So you cannot say that the data doesn't support that. But the data that we see is the data we have is backward looking. It tells us what has happened in the past.
Mm.
A few of them are forward looking, like business confidence and consumer confidence. Those ones are forward looking. It tells us what they are like, what actions are likely to happen. So you can't say, on the basis of this that it was wrong. But I think as a matter of past practice, perhaps I think that they could have been more moderate if they
Mm.
even they were going to cut. Yeah.
And for my search, I see that you were looking at about 120 basis points drop. We will come to that, but let's stay on this one for a few minutes. Now, you cautioned that the decision was aggressively premature. Maybe you can explain that for us a bit. Why do you believe that this level of easing was risky at this stage?
Because I think the stability that we have is not um, it's not deep rooted enough to support this kind of aggressive cut.
Mm.
Um, so first of all, I thought that we should be, before we even think about easing, we should be firmly entrenched in the medium term target,
Okay.
6 to 10%.
6 to 10, yeah.
So then you know that you have arrived where you have to be. I think the decision seemed to be made on the basis that we are likely to get to the target earlier than initially anticipated.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, we are still not there yet. We haven't reached the medium term target yet. We are still at 13.7. We are still way above it.
True.
Then, as the risks are still there. I think at the meeting, the governor himself acknowledged. Even at the start of the meeting, the governor explained that there's still potential upside risk because the government is programmed to spend a little bit more in the second half of the year than in the first half. That brings some additional pressures. Then we don't know what lies ahead of us in terms of international commodity prices. There are chances that utility tariffs could go up again.
Mm.
Then there's still agitation about transport fares. I'm sure this morning we've heard some agitation. We've seen some tax measures that have the potential to also be inflationary. So I think when you look at all of those, you need to balance it out. You need to say, well, let me wait out and see whether these are not going to reverse this inflation we are seeing before you decide to be very aggressive. That's why I was thinking that perhaps cutting up to 100 basis points, it allows you to weigh out and learn a little bit more about where the stability is and where we are. Then you'll be on a stronger footing to start cutting more aggressive.
I see. But does the fact that we are still under IMF oversight play a role in there?
I don't know how much of a role. I think, if anything, what the IMF had been, expertly been saying is to keep the policy rate tight, which they didn't. So I'm not sure that at least this decision, give such an situation to that.
Prof, we couldn't get you well. I don't know if you can raise your voice a bit.
Okay, is it better?
Yeah, relatively. Yeah, okay. So you are saying that you don't know whether the IMF oversights played a role in there.
So what I was saying is that the IMF wanted them to keep the rates fairly tight.
Yeah.
They've done a certain, so I'm not sure. That's not to say they didn't take into consideration the view, but they are looking at more data, more current data than the IMF is looking at. So they have made their decision. I don't think that if they were taking a decision solely to please the IMF, we probably wouldn't have seen that level of cut.
The cut. I see. Okay, so Prof, now tell us, what are the effects? What are the effects of this? This huge cut we are seeing. Are there some negative effects in the coming days?
So the whole idea is to ease the cost of credit, the cost of borrowing, so that it will be easier for businesses and households to borrow. If you look at our current loan pricing, there are two major components. There's the Ghana reference rate, which serves as the base, and then there's a risk premium. So when you go to a bank to borrow, they start with the rate, and they assess how potentially risk you are as a lender, and then they will add a risk premium. The Ghana reference rate itself is computed based on three indicators. There's the monetary policy rate. It has a weight of 40%. Sorry. Then there's the interbank lending rate, short-term rate, which has a weight of 20%. And there's the 91-day treasury bill rate, which has a weight of 40%. So when you cut the policy rate by any 100 basis points, the Ghana reference rate will reduce by, if you cut the monetary policy rate 100 basis points, the Ghana reference rate will reduce 40 basis points at the minimum.
Okay.
Because every time you cut the monetary policy rate, it also gives a signal to the interbank market. So usually the interbank market rate will also reduce. So now that we've cut this MPR by 300 basis points, at minimum, the Ghana reference rate will reduce by 120 basis points. Yeah. But it's likely to be more, because any additional reduction on the interbank market will also be reflected in the Ghana reference rate. So that would mean that longer term lending rates generally should come down if the risk premium remains the same, i.e., if banks view that lending is the risk associated with lending, the likelihood that people will default, if it hasn't changed, then obviously you expect that the Ghana reference rate is going to come down more than 120 basis points. And then that means that it's cheaper for banks to lend, and that means for businesses, cost of credit, which many businesses complain about, is going to come down. That should boost the spending in the economy. Now, I think it's usually consumer finance. So consumer financing, if it's extensively consumer financing, which is not backed by extensive increase in production of goods and services, that's where the pressures come generally. So you can't pinpoint and say, oh, this it's just that when you have a fragile stability or fragile recovery as we have, then you just need to be careful. You just need to be careful. If things development on the international front move against us, then things could quickly unravel. I think that's where they need to be cautious always comes.
Mm. So if there are no external shocks, we are fine. We can manage, isn't it?
We are probably going to be okay, yes.
Mm. I see. Okay. Now, Prof, you have spoken about the fact that the effect is not going to be seen. I mean, credit is not going to, the lending rate and all of that are not going to be seen within the shortest possible time, but it will take some time. Can you throw some more light on that?
Well, so I think what I've said is that people should be a little measured in thinking that, oh, there's a 300 basis point reduction, therefore the cost of credit is going to be slashed quite
Mm.
substantially, because like I explained earlier on, the banks also have to look at the risk, overall risk. Generally, if you start from where we were and the optimism within businesses and in the households, consumers, then a point to some higher growth. Generally, if the economy is growing, it should be relatively easier for businesses to be businesses should be more profitable, and it should be easier for them to make settle their debt. But the non-performing loans, which is one measure of how risky it is to lend, the non-performing loans rate is still very high.
Mm.
That part hasn't declined. So I think it's possible that banks may proceed with caution. It doesn't mean they will keep their rates unchanged, but it may not be as substantial as people anticipated. I think that's the point I've made in the past. We need to get to a point where the non-performing loans are coming down, and then you begin to see, okay, now the risk that people will not repay their loans is lower. Then it becomes easier for the banks to lend to cut their interest rate more substantially.
Mm. Now, but the Bank of Ghana said that the non-performing loans are dropping, isn't it?
Well, they said it's dropping. I mean, we just have to look at the data that they published.
Mm.
They published that data. So what they call
The financial stability review.
the current summary of economic and financial data.
Mm.
So when you look at it, non-performing loans. Let's start from the start of this year, or in December 2024, the non-performing loan rate was 21.8%. In January, it moved up to 22.6. February, it stayed at 22.6. March, it moved to 23.4. April, it moved to 23.6. This is the most recent one that they reported, or I think they might have updated it. So, from the start of the year, it's been going up.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure uh, what would be the basis for saying, even if it has declined, to be marginal. I'm trying to check with the most recent data that they posted,
Mm.
whether indeed it has started coming down, because that's always that's a concern. The the non-performing loan rate. So I'm sure in the course of the
Conversation, yes. I'm also trying to see if I can get it so we can have a good conversation. Now, Prof, you're talking about the fact that there's going to be. It's not like the banks are not going to change their rates, but it's going to be quite marginal because they're going to observe or monitor the trends for some time before they go all out. Do you think SMEs and informal businesses will actually benefit, or will the borrowing relief be confined to large firms?
So sorry, I think we are in a position to address that issue. So this is what has happened. So if you look at the NPLs, The last in March, it has increased to 23.1, 23.6. In May, it stayed at 23.6. And then in June, it declined to 23.1. Now, so it's still even higher than where we ended last year. And yes, we've seen only 1 month decline between May and June. So I don't know whether just that 1 month decline is enough for us to say. We haven't even seen a pattern or a trend.
Mm,
So I think we should, that's something to note.
I
Now,
see.
to your question about whether this is going to be big firms or SMEs.
SMEs, yeah.
Well, I mean, for many big firms, I mean, this is important. Also for SMEs, I think these days, because the banks have increased their lending to SMEs, then it means that if there's opportunity to cut their rates, the banks have made deliberate effort to target SMEs. A few of the banks have set up huge SME units to try and support SMEs.
True.
So because of that, I think if there's any reduction, it should affect all, generally it should affect both large firms and as well as SMEs. So generally, I think I'm not sure that I would say it's necessarily going to be big firms or small firms. I think you should expect that both categories of businesses should see an impact.
Mm, I see. Okay. Uh, let's also talk about some of the structural constraints that we are seeing now. You've warned before about a growing disconnect. I mean, macroeconomic gains versus the real life realities. What specific structural hurdles are at play here?
So I think when the economy is growing,
Mm,
so in time past we used to think that once the economy is growing, everybody will benefit. But that has not always been the case, because which sectors of the economy is growing matters. You know, if you look at the Ghanaian economy, it's divided into agric, industry, and manufacturing, and then each of them is subdivided. So agric has about 5 subsectors or so, industry something similar, and then services has about 9 subsectors.
mm,
So when we say the economy is growing and the growth is driven by, for instance, capital intensive sectors, then and there are no linkages to the rest of the economy, then that growth may not necessarily even affect many Ghanaians. There are times where the GDP numbers, where the economy is growing strongly, and yet people feel completely disconnected from whatever the growth is. That can happen if, for instance, if the growth is primarily driven by extractives, especially oil, because the extent to which our oil output touch the average Ghanaian is limited. We haven't managed to develop industries around our oil sector where many ordinary Ghanaians are connected.
mm,
So when the oil sector is growing, it's not like it's pulling many SMEs along.
along, right.
Or the other part is the informal sector. If mining is growing, what is happening is that we just dig the minerals from the ground and we export them. So if you are not part of those who are directly involved in that process, it won't touch you.
Mm,
So you don't really feel connected. I think that's the sense in which we always want to be mindful that the growth is broad-based. And the other thing we have to understand is that what we have seen improving is the macroeconomic indicators. It's not like we have produced data that said, oh, the number of people living in poverty has reduced by this, or the number of people who are gaining employment is reduced by this.
mm,
Because our analysis, or the data discussion focuses so much on the macro indicators. We don't go further to say, okay, how many jobs have been created? Because if you say while we are growing, we are creating jobs, or while the city is stabilizing, it's leading to creation of jobs, then you know its direct impact
Of
on a
course.
broader base of the people,
Mm.
or poverty is declining, or we are reducing inequality. Those measures are not usually in our mainstream discussion. So we, there's been times where we say, oh, the economy is growing faster than expected, and then we see that unemployment is inching up.
Mm.
There's been times where in 2023 or so, we said, oh, the economy is growing faster than expected. And yet, many more people became food insecure. Many more people became multidimensionally poor. That's the sense in which I say, well, we have to look at a broader series of micro level data and not focus only on the macro and say, oh, all is well and good. It doesn't mean that the macro is not important. You need that stability for a long time so that it helps businesses, including SMEs, even including the informal sector, to begin to create more wealth. But if you only focus on the macro, it could well be misleading.
Mm. Of course. So currently, from the look of data that is coming out, you think that it is quite macro focused, isn't it?
Well, I mean, when the finance minister presented the budget and he was telling us the improvement, we only need to look at the data that we focus on. We focus on inflation, focus on GDP, we focus on exchange rate, we focus on government finances. There was no discussion about how many jobs have been created. There's no discussion about how many people have been lifted out of poverty. There's no discussion about rising wages. Even the rising wages, so there might be mention of increase in public sector wages, but that is barely 10% of the workforce. What about the informal sector? So clearly, and it's not a criticism of the current administration. It's always been the case. Whenever we want to point to progress we've made, we only point to macroeconomic indicators. I'm just saying that you can't just look at that and say therefore everybody is better off. You have to look at more information, different sources of especially micro data.
Bro, so what are the fundamental things that we need to address as a country if we want to really see some improvement in what we're talking about now?
Well, I think there are different aspects of things that we have to look at. We talk about structural issues. There are structural issues in government finances, and the structural issues with the real economy themselves. When we go to the IMF, mainly what they try to help to address is the structural issues in public finances. A situation where we don't generate enough revenues, and we spend money we don't have. The government spends money they don't have. Now, I think there's been some conversations that suggest that we want to address that. The big thing that the finance minister has promised is that they are reviewing they are doing VAT reforms. The expectation is that there are too many exemptions in our VAT regime. They will be rolled back. Then there are too many distortions. Some people are similar businesses. Somebody is on flat rate 4%, somebody is on 17%, and there are issues even with the calculation. Then the whole elephant in the room about what we have to do to broaden the tax base. I think that this VAT reform is important because VAT is one of the biggest tax handles. The issue is that the VAT that we collect is not even up to 60% of our potential. So in principle, if we improve the collection, even in only VAT, our revenue base will be significantly higher. So that is there. Then I think the other thing that this current administration is trying to do is trying to glean more from our extractive sector, especially the gold resources. So the establishment of the gold board, the idea is to cut part of the leakages because illicit financial flows are a big problem.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard cases where some people, I think the UAE, they reported that they imported more gold from Ghana than Ghana reported that we exported.
That's true.
That's a huge leakage.
Yeah.
So I think if that, so the idea in principle is good. Let's try and plug every loophole so that nobody can export gold and then deny the government what is due.
Mm.
So all of those, but the leakages are in many other sectors. They are in cocoa, they are in many different sectors that we need to deal with. Then there's the issue about the informal sector. Earlier on, I think they brought a new revised form of informal sector tax. But I think there's a lot more to be done. One reason why we keep bringing new tax handles is because there are so many people who we are not getting to pay.
Yeah.
And I think the reforms that we did with the digitization, property addresses, as well as the Ghana card, we really need to take advantage of that to ensure that the systems are connected and talking.
Mm.
So if you are not paying some activity that you are trying to perform, you'll be able to find out. You go to the land commission to go and register some property, a land of some value. You should be able to connect to GRA to say this person is registering a land of this value. That person has never paid tax. They have to explain to GRA what economic activity they've been performing for which they generate that kind of income. To be able to afford that kind of property. Or if you go and register a vehicle of some value, that information should be able to go to the GRA for GRA to say, well, our record doesn't show that you've been paying any taxes. So you should be able to explain what is it that you have been doing, that you have not been declaring income and paying taxes. So if you get those systems to connect, that will help. Then there's also the other thing about property rates and the fact that there are landed properties that we are not collecting the rates properly. So that, and then the other issue has to do with inefficiencies in government spending. I think many people think that addressing that is even more important, because what's the point in generating more revenue if they are going to be leaked away in inefficient spending? So I think that is an aspect, making sure public procurement is not generating losses, and making sure that, when government is spending, we are getting value for money. So all these, every time the Auditor General report comes out, people spending public money without following procedures and all of that. So we have to deal with that aspect. But that is just public finances. That is the government's, finances. That is the structural issue that have to be addressed there. It appears that we are taking them bit by bit. We haven't made as much progress, but hopefully, that we come to that. Then there's the issue about the structure of the economy, the imbalance. I'm sure, part of the discussion when the currency appreciated, Ghanaians were happy.
Yeah.
Because they say things are going to become cheaper. I mean, how many countries will be happy when their currency appreciates? You only need to ask yourself. You've built an economy that is so import dependent that we are celebrating currency appreciation. Countries are fighting because others are keeping their currency artificially low. Because if you build an economy that is just depending on importing everything, including human beings, you import everything. So then it means that it's like it's in our interest that the currency is appreciating. Do you worry about what it's doing to the exporting side? I'm sure you've been following the discussion about the new producer price.
Yeah.
And the fact that in dollar terms, it's a substantial increase. In CD terms,
CD is not.
It's next to nothing. That's because the currency has appreciated. What incentive does it give to exporters? That is only the cocoa farmers. What about other people who are producing and exporting? What does the currency, appreciation do to them? So we can on one hand say, oh, we want to build an economy that is export driven or diversify export, doing import substitution, when we are giving people the incentive to import more. And that's exactly what you do when the currency appreciates. You make it cheaper for people to import. You are making it harder for people to export. So I think that's the big thing. A country with the potential we have to produce and manufacture, still importing basic things is an issue. And I think that's an issue that has to be addressed.
Mm.
That's the biggest structural issue.
I
The
see.
fact that we are we are not producing enough and we are importing things that we've even produced in the past. Why on earth do we produce basic manufacturing items like plastics and paper, and now we even import water, we import matches?
Toothpick and all of that.
When we were younger, it's when we were younger, we produce all of these.
Mm.
So I think every time we are importing, we are exporting jobs to other places. I think it's something that we should keep in mind. So for the structural side, that is the thing. And that itself is linked to what we are just talking about, the cost of doing business in the country.
Mm.
Because if people, from a consumer's point of view, why should I buy local chicken at twice the price of an imported chicken? But if for a consumer, when I go to the market, I'm looking for the bargain.
Yeah.
But it behoves on a policymaker to say, well, we can't do this. This doesn't work because we can't continually import because imported things are cheaper. If it means raising additional tariffs, or if it means supporting the domestic producer to become more efficient so that poultry farmers are not struggling to find feed because maize has become too expensive. Those are the structural things that we have to address.
Mm.
Then we will move the economy away from this over dependence on import to export, or at least do more import substitution. Produce and keep the jobs here. The more we are adding value and producing more things domestically, the more we we are going you will be able to increase productivity and create more jobs for the teeming Ghanaian youth.
Mm. Right. Prof, thanks for that breakdown. Please hold on briefly for me. Well, if you just tune in, this is Business Breakfast on Z101.9 FM with me, Nitra B. Hammond. And this morning on our roundtable discussion, we're speaking to Professor Patrick Assuming. He is a professor at the University of Ghana Business School, and he is helping us understand, pay attention to the monetary policy rate. And we've spoken about extensive things. We've talked about, in just a few minutes ago, he was talking about some of the structural issues that we need to address as a country to help us. If you want to join the conversation, I would love to hear from you. You can send us a WhatsApp on 0544321019, 0544321019. You can as well call me on 030395661, 030395661, and I give you the opportunity to share your thoughts. We're streaming live on Facebook at ZFMGH and also on YouTube at Z Multimedia. Please do well to engage our posts, and then we will give you, I'll read your comments for you. All right, Prof, let's continue the conversation. And I want to double click on some of the things that you're speaking about. And the very first one is the informal sector, formalizing the informal sector. You said we haven't been able to make a lot of progress. Why aren't we making headway in there? Is it a lack of will, or maybe because of some political issues? And I say political issues because maybe politicians are saying, okay, when we come too hard on the people who are in the informal sector, they might not vote for us during elections and all of that. What are your thoughts on that, Prof?
Well, I think there are, when you have an economy that is 90% informal, you have two issues. Do you formalize the informal sector, or do you find ways to keep the informal sector informal while still be able to raise revenue from them?
Mm.
Now, there are several issues why some firms don't formalize. Part of that is that the processes are not friendly, because if somebody runs an informal business selling in the market, as far as they are concerned, it's very difficult for them to leave their shop for one day, go to the registrar of companies office, spend the whole day there just to register, and they might not even be able to do it in one day. There are some people who genuinely want to formalize, but that is a constraint. But I think there are majority of businesses who don't want to formalize exactly because of the threat of taxation. Because there's a sense that the moment they make themselves known, the taxman will descend on them and start bringing the tax bill. So that issue is also there. So it appears that the strategy appears to be, let's find a way to tax them even if they are informal.
Informal, right.
And I think one issue is, when people, of course, nobody anywhere want to pay tax. But it is easier to pay the tax when you see what the tax is doing for you.
True.
So I think it helps to see, it would be good for Ghanaians to see that, public services are improving. Like when I go to the marketplace, things are organized. And when they go and they see tangible things, it's easy for them to accept the taxes. So I think that is a conversation, making sure that public spending is efficient and taxpayers' money is working for people. I think that is a conversation. It appears that at the moment it will take a Herculean effort to get even 30% of informal businesses to formalize it, because some of them have made strategic decision. It's a strategic choice that I know I want to stay informal. So that is there. So it means finding more efficient ways to collect the taxes from them. And it appears that's a very good short-term strategy. Only that, when election is approaching, then suddenly the will to collect taxes from, pay, this small amount that people pay to even enter public, the transport owners pay to enter the loading stations. It becomes a problem because it certainly becomes a political issue.
Right. You talk about how the fact that they are not seeing the development in certain areas is causing it's actually leading to the lack of wealth on the side of the businesses in the informal sector to contribute to the tax net. But isn't it a matter of the fact that we are still not getting a lot more money, and so because of that we can't translate that into development in our communities and in public service and all of these things? That is why we are not seeing the progress there. And so if we want to really see the progress there, then we might want to now get more money and then or get more revenue, and then we can channel them into the development things that we're talking about.
Well, that sounds like a chicken or egg problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, look, people say, well, I'm giving you are saying what I'm giving you is little. Show me the little that you can make it work. Then I'll be more willing to pay a lot. How about that? I think that, yes, we can do big projects when we collect a lot of taxes, but let's show you the small taxes that, our taxes are working for us. So, that's the side where I will err. That let's make taxes work for ordinary people, then I'm sure they'll be more willing. But of course, part of that is just enforcement. Like I said, everywhere else, people, people don't like paying taxes. It's a fact. But elsewhere, the consequences of not paying your tax is so severe that you even contemplate it. So I think, yes, let's give people incentive to pay. Let's make it easy for them. Let them see the tax working for them. At some point, you say, well, you are going to enforce it. The law says you should pay, and you should pay. And then so you have to improve that enforcement.
And I think that's the path that the politicians don't also want to take. Anyway, but All right, Prof. You talked about a lot of other things. Because our conversation is focused on monetary policy, I don't want to go into them. You talk about the structure of the economy, the imbalances, the corruption issues, and all of that. I don't want us to spend too much time. So let's come back to the conversation we're having. Now, some commentators have argued that this particular cut we are seeing, the 28 to 20, now 25%, signals a shift toward growth-oriented policy. Do you view this monetary policy and fiscal discipline as properly aligned now? Sorry.
Well, I think in essence, yes, they are moving in the same direction because what the government is doing, I mean, by the finance ministry is doing, is try to tighten government budget so that it will support the stability that we are seeing. So usually, if government is spending money it doesn't have, then it puts pressure on the monetary authority to try and mop up the excess liquidity. So when the government is tightening, then it means that there's not much cleaning up that the central bank has to be doing because the government is not putting its house in order. So in some sense, there's that coordination. I think obviously when you cut rates, you are trying to boost growth. You are trying to support the growth rather than focus more on price stability. So, but we have to understand that we can't grow only by cutting rates. There are other problems within our economy that the monetary policy rate won't solve. The monetary policy rate, cutting it will only deal with the cost of credit. It doesn't deal with bureaucracy in public services. It doesn't deal with rising cost of utilities. It doesn't deal with other issues, the multiplicity of taxes that makes doing business in Ghana a little business unfriendly. So let's not think that yes, the cutting the rate is to support the growth, but we can't just grow because we've cut the rate. There are other things that we have to do.
Okay, so there are lots of other things that we have to do. What other things do you think we have to do?
So like I've just been mentioning, when when businesses are thinking about the cost, the cost of credit is just one because that is just one input. What about the productivity of labor? What about cost of general cost of utilities? What about quality of our roads? That in some sense affect the returns to private investment, especially if you go and set up a factory somewhere and the road is not bad and your vehicles are breaking down faster. That's your cost. So what about quality of internet? If the internet is not working well, so there are many other aspects that we have to deal with. The cost of credit, what the monetary policy has done is just one aspect. If people complain that we have too many taxes, and that makes the Ghanaian business uncompetitive, we have to address all of those things.
Right, before we can make some headway.
So yes, reducing the cost of credit helps, but there are the high cost of doing business in the economy is not just the cost of credit. There are other things as well. Utilities, for instance. So you notice that at the same time that the government is reviewing some taxes, at the same time that policy rate has been cut, utilities in the last review went up, and that adds to the cost of the business. So we have to address all of these.
Right. Okay, so I asked earlier the effect of easing this, monetary policy, but could this aggressive easing fuel inflation risk? Is there anything it has got to do with inflation risk, or maybe destabilizing the currency? Because we've seen the cedi strengthening quite recently. Is it going to undermine it in any way?
That potential is there. If especially advanced countries start raising their rates, and then we are cutting ours, then it's going to put pressure on the currency. Then the other thing is, so look, when we ease, we are trying to, in essence, in basic economics, we say we are trying to increase money supply. Now, generally, when you increase money supply and it goes to fuel production of goods and services. That is not necessarily inflationary. It is when, there's so much money and we are not producing goods and services. We are just using it to buy and spend. That's where the demand pressures come. So the potential is always there. Exactly how it will play out is our ability to combine the lower cost of credit with production. If it goes to support businesses and what they are doing, then it may not necessarily be inflationary.
Oh, okay. Right. So we're likely going to see some. I mean, that potential is there, really.
The potential is there.
Okay. Um, our time is almost up, and so we'll try and wrap up now. But is this a one-off measure, in your opinion, or do you anticipate some further easing in the coming months?
I think what they are going to do is in the next meeting in September, they will get additional data on how the economy is working, and then they will decide whether further easing is necessary or not. So, like you're saying, there's a risk. They are going to monitor other developments. They are going to monitor whether there are some external shocks that are coming along. So they are going to keep eye on all aspects of the economy, growth, and then price stability, and then that's what we'll decide. So we will see. I
So,
think nobody knows. The way the economy works is that there are things you control, there are things you don't control. If some people decide to fight somewhere, that has an impact on you. You can't control that.
so it's early days yet.
Yeah. So I think what they are going to do is to monitor what this cut is going to do, whether they are beginning to see any inflationary pressures pick up, and then they'll decide the next course of action.
Okay. Right. So, Prof, finally, which economic indicators should households and micro businesses follow to understand how this rate cut plays out?
So, well, I mean, from the direct thing that you have to look at is average lending rate. Are banks revising their lending rate down? And I think that's what is more immediate for especially businesses. Are they seeing? And then, of course, the other thing is every month, I'm sure today is, I'm not sure what the schedule is. We are going to get a new inflation number. We don't get it later this week. Next week, we'll get a new inflation number.
Yeah.
That will give us a sense of whether indeed the disinflation is well established. And all of that informs what the next course of action will be for the central bank. So I think keeping your eye on that, and as well as whether there are any additional pressures on the currency, all of those play a role.
Okay. All right, Prof, thank you very much for your time. Really grateful that you made time to speak to me this morning, and thanks for sharing your insights as well.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
All right, please enjoy the rest of your day. Okay, so that was Professor Patrick Assuming. He is an economist and he's a professor at the University of Ghana Business School, and he helped us this morning to understand exactly whether we're going to see, monetary policy rates take effect really in terms of our lending rate and borrowing and the cost of borrowing really in the country. And so that's our time will allow us today.